Welcome back. You're watching Bottomline Africa. Now, our throwback soundbite for this Thursday comes from retired Zambian founding father Kenneth Kaunda, addressing issues of marginalization by the minority white colonial rulers at the time in a 1963 TV interview. Let's listen in.
So these elections are very complex. They appear to hinge on the 15 national seats. Do you think these seats will be filled?
Well, my guess is that 3, 4, or 5 may be filled at the first round.
Does this mean that Northern Rhodesia will be out without a government for the next 6 weeks?
Oh no, I wouldn't think so really. I would like to see whichever party has a majority of seats form government.
What is the future of the white man here in Northern Rhodesia under a unit government?
Well, in fact, if I may take this to individual, I would say any white individual, man or woman, has exactly the same rights under unity government as I personally have.
In other words, the rights of the whites will not be affected at all.
That's exactly what I mean.
But you will have equality among the two races.
Exactly.
And finally, Mr. Kaunda, by this I presume you mean that UNIP wants no part of the Federation whatsoever.
Well, as it stands, there's no compromise at all. We would like to secede from this federation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaunda.
Thank you.
Now, the world today is marking the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. The day draws attention to the low global conviction rate for violent crimes against journalists and media workers, estimated at only 1 in every 10 cases. Kenya, for instance, has been the focus of global attention the past few weeks following cases of assault on journalists covering political events. Let's now take a broader look at the numbers of journalists who have lost their lives in the cause of duty, and the numbers are really such grim statistics. Now, in 2017, there were 8 fatalities in the first few months. In 2016, 58 journalists across the world died in the line of duty. Still in 2016, 41 journalists were jailed in prisons across sub-Saharan Africa. Of the 41 who were jailed, 33 were in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Going back in 2015, 14 journalists were killed across the world and 34 were jailed in Africa. The murder of 24 journalists in Somalia, 5 in South Sudan, and 5 in Nigeria since 2006 have remained unsolved. Somalia has the most unsolved murder cases of journalists, with South Sudan ranking 5 and Nigeria ranking 12 among the 13 countries. Now, the deadliest countries for journalists to work in include the following countries: Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, Libya, and Mexico. Let's also take a look at the number of journalists who were killed while on the line of duty across the world. Just taking a look at the statistics. In 2016, 58 journalists across the world, and if you can see the numbers on your screen there, in 2012, 123 really across the world journalists were killed in the line of duty. So such grim statistics we are seeing there. And the worst bit of it, as we have seen statistics showing that only 1 in 10 cases, get to be persecuted. Such a sad state of affairs, painting a culture of impunity. And this forms the focus of our conversation tonight on this day that really focuses on how to end impunity for crimes against journalists. And to have this discussion with me, I'm joined with Dr. Dorothy Njoroge, who is the chairperson for the Association of Media Women in Kenya, AMWIC. David Omoyo is the CEO of the Media Council of Kenya. Yako Dutoy is the advisor for communication and information, UNESCO Office for Eastern Africa. So I just want to begin here in the country to paint a picture of the nature of crimes that journalists face in the line of duty. And I would like to start with you, David Omoyo, as the CEO of the Media Council of Kenya. Perhaps talk to us about the nature of crimes that Kenyan journalists really face in the line of duty and how this comes to your attention.
Yes, we have several cases of reported to us where journalists have been assaulted. One death that happened in Mombasa earlier in the year, but most of the cases that we've received in the past few weeks, especially around the elections, are assault against journalists, equipment being confiscated, threats, either personally or through SMS or letters. And in a few cases, we have had mob injustice where crowds descend on the journalists. We have bigger level where we have threats to media houses, threats to boycott, or trying to mobilize communities to threaten or attack media houses. And in the past, through the electioneering period, the Media Council has received 20 cases, which we are working on. Many more are unreported because a few journalists, especially community media journalists, don't know the mechanism of reporting, but we have many cases of crimes against journalists in this country.
All right, and Dr. Dorothy, of these certain crimes that are really perpetrated against journalists, there are specific directed towards women journalists, and over time, the cases that have been reported are cases of sexual assault. Is this still the case?
Okay, thank you, Sharon. As far as women journalists are concerned, they face some unique challenges because the harassment they face seems to be all around, because some of them do face harassment even within their work environment. So they do face harassment sometimes from their colleagues or and bosses, but at the same time they face harassment out in the field, when collecting information and when writing their stories. They also do face a lot of online violence. So while not so many women journalists have been killed in the line of duty, the nature of violence they face is unique.
All right, and just to stay with that, because it's an absolutely crucial discussion, and it is unfortunate that in many cases where women journalists are faced with such assaults, whether out there in the field or even within, unfortunately, in our newsrooms, that the saddest bit or the most unfortunate bit is that they don't come out to speak about it. We don't come out to speak about it. Is there any specific way that we are trying to make it easier for us women journalists to come out and report such cases, and are there frameworks within which they are dealt with?
Okay, you're right about that. Most cases go unreported. As the Association for Media Women in Kenya, we've carried out a baseline survey to understand the kind of challenges women face as far as violence is concerned, especially online violence. And most of them say that they do not report for a number of reasons. Sometimes there are no mechanisms where they work that would help them to be able to address some of these challenges. And then also a lot of women in media occupy the lower ranks within, in terms of management and so on. So they don't have the wherewithal to kind of influence policy and create maybe some kind of support or resources that would help them to face these challenges.
All right. Let me bring in Yako Dito, who is the advisor for communications and information at the UNESCO Office for Eastern Africa. And Yako, Dr. Dorothy speaks of sometimes there being a lack of mechanisms which would enable not just women journalists, but even journalists to come out and report cases of assault, of abuse, or even, whatever nature of crime is perpetrated against them. How can both the workplaces and countries create a more enabling environment for journalists?
Thank you very much, Sharon, for the question. I think in pointing also to the importance of addressing the question of safety of female journalists, which has definitely shown an increase during the last few years. The question on what can be done for women journalists, but also in general in addressing the question of safety of journalists, actually points to the importance of a shared responsibility. That shared responsibility points also to the importance of media houses actually installing and having at bay the necessary policies so that women journalists can actually report abuses that happen. And that definitely plays a very important role to give women also confidence in order to address the plight that they might experience within the workplace. I think also more generally within the police forces and others, I know that here in Kenya there's something that's called gender desks, but also for police officers to be actually aware that female journalists might be more vulnerable in specific situations, and that particular care should be taken so that journalists in general, but also female journalists, and their right to operate in a safe environment is respected. And I think by raising the awareness towards them, it's quite important. I think another important element is definitely also to point to the important role that the journalist unions play, and also specifically those that represent female journalists, in order to make known the plight and also advocate for more rights and more policies and mechanisms put in place in order to address the question of safety of female journalists.
Right. And Omoyo, yes, how has it been handling these cases that have come to the fore in terms of investigations and even going through the prosecution rather of these cases? And have we seen any punitive kind of actions taken for cases that have been conclusively investigated?
We could give ourselves a very low success rate of below 15%. Mm-hmm. Challenge is sometimes the perpetrators are the very same people we expect to lead the process of netting punishment or following the law. We will see that most of the perpetrators, like now we said we are handling 20 cases, and in about 17 of those, the police are involved either directly or indirectly. So we have a very slow, or rather very low success rate of the prosecution. Mm-hmm. We are now very specific about the cases we are handling, trying to follow specifically. We have a direct correspondence with the Ministry of Interior and the Office of the Inspector General. Mm-hmm. But we do a little more apart from trying to follow up and get the perpetrators punished. The Media Council also is trying to work around getting legal support. And in a few cases, we have been able to support medical cover, evacuation, and safe houses with a network of partners. But I have to admit that at this point, we have a very low success rate at prosecution of the perpetrators.
Right, and perhaps what can be done to really increase the success rate of punitive actions and investigations, and really basically to just end impunity for these crimes against journalists? What kind of solutions do you suppose would be needed, or what kind of support?
One is a partnership with the law enforcement agencies. We wrote a letter to the Inspector General of Police about the cases we are handling. He has responded, asking for more information to follow up that, because sometimes we find that these crimes are committed by people down in the villages and communities. And so when we put pressure from the top, we can have a success rate. We have also written to the Director of Public Prosecutions to follow these specific cases. A few times we are not able to gather all the evidence needed because these are some very crude attacks. You know, when mobs attack people and disappear, it takes a lot of time to identify them. But I think with what we have begun, working with the Inspector General, specifically even in cases where the accused are policemen, I think that is a good beginning. Second is establish mechanisms for those who are affected journalists to report. We have a hotline number, the Media Council, where people are able to report. Then the Media Council follows up that through the police and other channels. And I think thirdly is advocacy. Get as many people as possible working around this.
Right.
And get as many other actors doing this. And the media can do a role in themselves, highlight such cases, including naming and shaming, and then putting pressure on the right relevant officers when we are clear that certain people who have violated the rights of journalists are not being prosecuted.
Right.
Yes.
And Dr. Dorothy, maybe just to continue with the unique challenges that face the media, the women in media, and talking about punitive scenarios. Today we saw legislator in the UK resign 15 years after, that particular act of engaging with a journalist in just mishandling in what would, in local terms, to be honest, be seen as a very small act by putting his hand on a female journalist's knee. And we have not seen much of such kind of even looking introspection. What needs to be done to change this sort of laissez-faire and casual culture and approach we have towards sexual assault of women?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, and I think it goes beyond media to society in general, where I think women are still occupy, are still perceived as less than within a society, and therefore it's difficult for people to take personal responsibility when they have done something wrong. So I think there needs to be greater awareness and also greater visibility of the ills that are committed against women, because somebody commented, and I agree with him, even in the recent case where the journalists covering the event at the WIPA headquarters were assaulted, and there was a lot more focus on the male journalist than the female journalist. So first, there needs to be more visibility. Women need to be taken seriously as professionals, and then I think people will then probably take it more seriously when they actually inflict harm on a woman journalist.
So the problem is that it's more of a cultural thing that goes beyond this particular profession.
Absolutely.
Right. And Yako, talk to us about the UN plan of action on the safety of journalists and what kind of approach it takes to make the working environment better for journalists.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, the UN plan of action for crimes against journalists and the question of impunity is a very important instrument in order to address the question of safety of journalists. This UN plan of action actually brings together and puts the onus of the safety of journalists on a number of stakeholders. And this is exactly what this UN plan of action does, in order to say that the UN, UNESCO, and other UN agencies, we do have a role in order to make sure that journalists can work in a safe environment. Academia has a role to play in order to do the necessary research, the necessary training for journalists. Civil society has an important role to play in order to advocate for the rights of journalists, not to be harassed, etc. The government, of course, has a very important role in order to put in place the necessary legislative frameworks, in order to assure accountability, in order to take a preventive action, and also the police force has an important role to play in order to know how to treat these cases. So the UN Plan of Action really points to the fact that when you address the question of safety of journalists, it is not just the responsibility of one entity, but of several entities.
Right.
And when these several entities actually work together
Right.
through a mechanism, a national mechanism, for example, one can actually address it, and hopefully will address the question also of impunity
Right.
against these crimes.
All right, and it does sound like an excellent blueprint for creating such an environment which, would then be devoid or effectively handle cases of crime committed against journalists. Maybe just briefly talk to us about the extent of its implementation. Is it something that is being effectively implemented, or are there specific challenges to this implementation?
Of course, there are challenges, but I think that is also why the UN system and UNESCO specifically are standing right in order to assist member states to implement this plan of action. And some of the challenges, I think, in implementing it is, first of all, to recognize that there is actually a problem related to safety of journalists, to have the political will to address it, to bring these different actors together through a national mechanism, also to address some of the very specific issues that might come up within a country. You talk specifically of Somalia, South Sudan, and other countries. There are very specific issues that need to address. And I think lastly, within the implementation of this UN plan of action, one also needs to recognize that it talks about physical safety, psychological safety, but also the working conditions in which journalists work. Because often I think it's very much linked to the safety conditions in which journalists exercise their profession today.
All right, thank you. And Omoyo, please talk to us about how journalists can protect themselves. What necessary skills, or what are prudent thoughts to have about self-protection as a journalist while going about your duty?
The profession being very aware about the hazards around your workplace. If you're walking into maybe a public demonstration or a picketing scene, you know your escape route, know your car, get well acquainted with the safety mechanisms and safety officials around you. Have a hotline, for example. If you are in a place where they're doing maybe throwing objects, have helmets like we have seen them have. And in serious cases, we have like in war reporting, we have seen journalists allowed by law to have bulletproof vests and all that. But again, it's about scanning the environment. When you are engaging in a story that is a little more risky, do your background check well, make sure you have the right contacts. Because a few cases where we have journalists killed also, we have cases where they are lured into traps and then killed, or sometimes attacked in dark alleys and all that. So we can say, in principle, safety will begin with yourself, and also get to know who else can be a partner in the process. But we have ideally a comprehensive safety and protection policy for journalists in Kenya. It's available at the Media Council, and it goes deep into how to take care of yourself, either from the police or the public and all that. It basically is about anybody in a dangerous situation, how you get yourself out, you're able to evacuate yourself, how you run to the next available exit, how you report to the authorities, and all that.
All right. Yes. And Dr. Dorothy, other than being the chair of AMWIC, you also are a lecturer. And is protection, self-protection, one of the skills enshrined in training journalists to be?
Okay. Well, within academia, things do move a little slower.
Right.
So, like, if you want to change the curriculum, they are all, levels of approvals.
Right.
And for example, like at USIU, we have dual accreditation, both locally and in the US. So, but we have, this is an issue that we are aware of.
Yeah.
And we've had collaborated with other agencies to provide some training, but We've also attended training by the ICRC, who are also concerned about issues of safety, especially in war-torn places.
Right.
But definitely our university curricula in general need to embed this kind of course.
Right, and earlier we spoke about the issue of sexual assault for women journalists, both in the workplace and while in the line of duty out there in the field. Are there any other gender biases that, you know, would then be termed as a challenge that women journalists get to face, either in terms of content, even production, or how would you term, what is your view on this kind of challenges that pertain to gender biases in the media industry?
Yes, women generally face challenges in terms of content because like maybe when they do news interviews and stuff like that, it's not taken as seriously. Maybe an example I can give, which I think everybody noted, was when your competitor station had two lady journalists that you know, anchor the Kiswahili news at 7, and when they landed an interview with the president, everybody thought they were just giggling and that, you know, the interview was too serious to be given to two ladies. So I think women are expected to do lifestyle issues and not really hard news, so that becomes a challenge. Yet we have seen that women as well as men have been winning international awards, and therefore the CNN Journalism Award, for example, we're very proud from USIU, we're very proud of Asha Mwilu, who won the CNN Journalist Award. So women are just as able, but the perception there, and even if you look at the Twitter feed when they present serious stories, they don't seem to be taken seriously by the audience.
And it's absolutely unfortunate when you're expected to, quote-unquote, man up. And Yako, let's talk about how we had earlier on in the year, during the World Press Freedom Day, the Jakarta Declaration, which, among other things, talked about the need for multi-stakeholder international approach in order to achieve success in ending violence against journalists. Who are these stakeholders, and what role can we say these various stakeholders are expected to play as our final remarks, and what would be the best forward in ending impunity for crimes against journalists?
Yes, these different stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, are varied. I talked about the UN system itself that has a role to play, governments that have a role to play, the judiciary that has a role to play, the police service, academia, NGOs, professional organizations. But I think one element that we often forget is also that the consumers of media, the public, themselves also have a role to play in order to understand what is the role of a journalist in our society. Earlier it was mentioned that, for example, one of the high incidence rates is mobs that attack journalists. If people understand better what is the role of a journalist, the importance that they have to give us vital information, I think that there would also be more cases that would be brought to the forefront, and that we can even prevent some of these incidents to happen. So I really want to invite, I think, all the viewers also to take up that responsibility, so that journalists also can be protected and exercise their profession.
All right, thank you. And Omoyo, what would you say, moving forward, are the things that need to be done, or what needs to change systematically to change the culture of impunity for crimes against journalists in the country?
I think the law is very clear, of course. A journalist is a human being, is a Kenyan, of whichever nationality, the rights that they have. I think what we need to do now is follow up such cases so that people know very clearly that assaulting journalists or interfering with their work will not go unpunished. Secondly is working closely. As I said earlier, we have started working very closely with the law enforcement agencies, that is Office of Public Prosecution and the police, to make sure that such perpetrators, or when such cases happen, the perpetrators are identified and brought to book. Thirdly is increasing advocacy. Let people know specifically that journalists have rights when they are doing their work, and anybody trying to interfere or threaten them will be dealt with full force of the law. So ideally, if you strengthen the law, strengthen collaboration, and make sure that we have relevant government and legal representatives, we are able now to reduce that. And more so, if we also get the journalists to work closely so that you come to the aid of colleagues when they have been either threatened or injured or assaulted, that way, that is a type of advocacy that then can deter anybody planning that or any future occurrence of that.
Right. Dr. Dorothy, your closing remarks.
Well, my closing remarks are that the attacks against journalists are actually an attack against our democracy, and therefore it's a very serious issue. And if we value democracy, if we value human rights, then we need to protect the institution, the press, because we cannot be able to go forward as a democratic nation without a vibrant press. So I think there's need to educate our leaders. There's need to, the journalists need to do a better job at advocating for their own rights across the board, so that we're able to have a strong journalistic tradition in Kenya, which can influence the rest of the region.
All right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me tonight to have this very crucial conversation. Dr. Dorothy Njoroge is the chair for the Association of Media Women in Kenya and a lecturer as well. David Omoyo is the CEO of the Media Council of Kenya, and Yako Dutoy is the advisor for communication and information at the UNESCO Office for Eastern Africa. Many thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Right, to our images of the day. At a recent event, plus-size models showcased fashionable clothes at an event in Cameroon meant to encourage fuller women to walk the runway and embrace their curves. The plus-size modeling show also brings designers and stylists together to push them to pay more attention to a market that has been ignored. Many fuller women say it's difficult to find clothes their size in stores and often get discriminated against. Now, in its second year, the plus-size modeling show is working to give fashion entrepreneurs and shoppers a chance to exchange ideas. Outfits on show were presented by designers from Cameroon and Ivory Coast, with collections inspired by vibrant African prints and styles like the bubu dress commonly worn in West Africa.
It has been said that plus-size women cannot be confident. They can't be looked at as beautiful. But all this is not true. I am an example of someone who is confident, someone who is proud of her curves. I am here today to promote plus-size women because I have accepted myself for who I am. I have no insecurities about my body or how I feel inside. I love who I am. For this reason, I will appreciate other women who are plus size. It's a big challenge because some women have a fuller behind, hips, chest, and a large stomach. So most designers don't want to work with you. It's really complicated. I think there's a major problem with African concepts, but it's going to change with events such as this.
It was a huge move, which is good, because it was actually one of the things I was thinking to do in future, but different way. So I'm sure in the future we are going to work together.
All right, and let's get now to the bottom line tonight. When attacks on journalists remain unpunished, a very negative message is passed. The message being that reporting the quote-unquote embarrassing truth or unwanted opinions will get ordinary people in trouble. Perpetrators of crimes against journalists become bolder when they realize that they can attack their targets without ever facing justice. Furthermore, society loses confidence in its own independent systems, which are meant to protect us from attacks such as police and the judiciary. There's no doubt that the kind of news that gets silenced is exactly the kind of news the public needs to know. Information is crucial in order for any society to make the best decisions in their lives, be it economic, social, or political. This access to reliable and quality information is the very cornerstone of democracy, good governance, and effective institutions. For that reason, any crimes perpetrated against journalists, whether physical, psychological, or otherwise, need to be addressed with the importance they deserve. Investigated, prosecuted, and punitive actions taken against the perpetrators. The numbers across the world speak to the gross impunity of heinous crimes against journalists. It is unfortunate, unacceptable, and definitely must stop. That is the bottom line tonight. My name is Sharon Momanyi. Have a good night.